Chapter 9. The Nine-Story Demon Tower. We had fallen into a narrow, deep crevice, and everything beyond the beam of the flashlight was shrouded in darkness. The limited visibility prevented us from seeing the terrain beyond. The big guy checked for Engineer Lou's breath, and with a shake of his hand, he said despondently, "It's over. He's gone." Crawling over, I felt for Lou's carotid artery but indeed found no pulse. He had no heartbeat. Sighing, I said to the big guy, "Let's bury Engineer Lou." As I took out my entrenching tool to dig a grave, Gawa stopped me and pointed to the ground, hinting, "Bugs, fire." Gawa's reminder jolted me back to the memory of what had happened in the valley. We had initially tried to dig a grave for an engineer who had died from a fall, unearthing a malevolent beetle that, after burning 2 individuals, multiplied from 1 into 3. Of the 14 members in our squad, 10 perished within those few terrifying minutes. Clearly, this land was not to be disturbed casually. Who knew what other horrors lay beneath? I had a suspicion that there was more to this strange insect than a mere undiscovered species. Could the splitting of 1 into 3 after burning 2 people be just coincidence? It was unfathomable. We couldn't leave our comrade's body exposed, so he needed a respectful but safe interment. Using the flashlight for illumination, Gawa and the big guy collected rocks to lay over Engineer Lou's body as a makeshift cairn. Throughout this, Luo Ning sat motionless, silently watching the construction of the stone grave. Finally, she could no longer contain her grief and burst into tears, releasing the pent-up sorrow within her like a dam bursting. I wanted to console her but was at a loss for words. Her crying touched a nerve, and my own eyes welled up. I recalled the strong voices of our comrades singing army songs around the campfire just the night before. Their resonating songs seemed to echo still. Yet now, most of them lay forever under the Kunlun Mountain's vast glacier. I helped Luo Ning to her feet, and we all observed a moment of silence for Engineer Lou and the others. In those days, it was customary to recite from Chairman Mao's works in any circumstance. Leading the way, I began quoting, "Amidst white expanses, urgent marches on snow." The others joined in, "Over mountains, under heavens, the red flag unfurls through passes grand. Only those with noble sacrifice dare command the sun and moon to stand." Raising our right fists, we pledged, "We wish the great leader Chairman Mao eternal life, eternal life. We wish the health of Chairman Mao's close comrade-in-arms, Comrade Lin Biao, everlasting wellness. Comrades, rest assured in your journey. Some deaths are as light as feathers, others as heavy as Mount Tai. To die for the people outweighs Mount Tai, and you have sacrificed for the people's benefit. We must carry on the legacy of our fallen revolutionaries, follow the path your blood has colored, and take the cultural revolution to its end. Ultimate victory will forever belong to the workers, peasants, and soldiers." As a new recruit, I had never attended a comrade's memorial service and didn't know what to say. I just echoed what I had heard at meetings. Given the situation, there was no question of appropriateness. After a long while, we calmed down from the shock and pain, tending to our injuries, which were fortunately minor and did not obstruct our movement. Eating a few compressed biscuits, we huddled together to discuss our next steps. There was no way out through the mountain valley that was likely now filled by the avalanche. We needed to find another exit. Gawa patted his now empty ammunition pouch, signaling that we were low on bullets. Initially, due to the heavy equipment we were carrying, ammunition was provided in minimum quantities, 3 magazines per person. It wasn't a combat mission, and there weren't any bandits in the area, so we had been somewhat careless. When the avalanche hit, more ammunition was lost, leaving each of us with only about 20 bullets. There were also 2 hand grenades left. No wild beasts were expected underground, so the few remaining bullets should be enough for self-defense. The food was all gone. What little we had was already eaten. We had to find a way out within 2 days, or face the possibility of starvation underground. Fortunately, Luo Ning still had a compass with her. The fissure we had stumbled into was deeper than we had imagined. After heading south for a while, we reached a dead end as the crack veered north, and it felt as though we were walking underneath the Great Glacier. Hours of marching in the dark brought us deeper and farther. The further we walked, the lower the terrain became, and the larger the underground space grew. Luo Ning used a barometer to measure the air pressure, which, when converted to altitude, revealed we were at just over 400 meters above sea level, similar to Sichuan and far below the average altitude of the Tibetan Plateau. If we continued, it felt like we were heading toward the center of the Earth. Eventually, the land leveled out, and we heard the rush of water nearby, suggesting a large underground river. Finding no downward paths, I used the flashlight to search for a way up. Suddenly, the beam of light reflected off the rock wall, creating multiple glimmers as if shining on many fragmented mirrors.
Luoning kaspet, Mika.
The rest of us, unsure what Micah was, feared it was some kind of emergency and quickly shielded her, readying our rifles to fire at a moment's notice. "What are you doing?" Luo Ning exclaimed in surprise. I kept my rifle at the ready while asking her, "What's Micah? Where is it?" "Not an animal," Luo Ning explained. "I'm referring to the crystals all around us. Mica and quartz often coexist in the same strata." "Oh, look, there is also quartz." Although Luo Ning's primary responsibility was cartographic mapping, she frequently worked with geological teams and knew a fair amount about mineralogy. The crystalline substances around us, which resembled thin glass plates, were monoclinic crystals that could only be found in ancient combined rock strata. Hebei province underground had plenty of mica, but the mica here was exceptionally dark and hexagonal. The quality far surpassed those found in Ling County, Hebei, and based on the discolored mica, we must have been at an unimaginable depth. Attracted by the rare large mica formations surrounding us, Luo Ning moved from one piece to another, examining each with fascination. I idly picked up a small piece and observed it, but couldn't see anything particularly remarkable about it. Suddenly, the big guy yelled at Gawa, "Gawa, what are you doing? Get up quickly." When I pointed the flashlight towards him, I saw Gawa prostrating on the ground in the traditional Tibetan way, his entire body flat on the earth. What in the world was he doing? Bowing to whom? As I shifted the light ahead of him, I sucked in a breath of cold air in shock. Before us stood an imposing pyramid structure made up of thousands of massive logs, featuring countless flickers of red light across its surface. Using the faint glows for a better look, I saw that the base of the wooden pyramid was nearly 200 meters wide, built from mud and stone, with ancient cypress forming the body of the tower through 9 levels. Each level was filled with the dry remains of beings dressed in unusual ancient attire. Men, women, children, and elders, all there. Every massive tree trunk forming the tower was covered in mysterious Tibetan symbols. Was this a grave of some sort? With such incredible size, who had constructed it underground? I went over to Gawa, who was still on the ground, and pulled him to his feet. Although our party and army respect ethnic practices, and you, Gawa, are Tibetan, when you're in uniform, you're part of the People's Liberation Army. As communists, we don't indulge in idealism. Religious superstition is not allowed. The big guy laughed on the side. Well said. Who? You've really got the gift of the gab. Could be political instructor material. Luo Ning had been preoccupied with the mica, but hearing our squabble, she came over to inspect. Waving the big guy off to avoid interruption, I questioned Gawa again. What is this tower? Can you read what's written on it? Gawa shook his head persistently. I demanded, then why are you bowing to it if you don't understand it? Did the sight of all these bones scare you senseless? Gawa's face was full of panic as he fumbled out, Who? This big bear. I'm telling you, pulling. Something's pulling, many. The 9-story demon tower. I only understood the last 4 words, 9-story demon tower. What was the purpose? Just for burying the dead? Before Gawa could respond, Luo Ning came running back from the tower, stealthily signaling us to be quiet. She pointed at the structure behind her and whispered not to make noise for fear of disturbing them. Seeing her grave expression, I sensed trouble but didn't understand what she meant. So, in a hushed voice, I asked, Disturb what? The dead in the tower? No, it's those fire beetles, Luo Ning said, her voice fraught with tension. They're all sleeping on the corpses, too many to count. It was then I realized that the dense red gleam on the tower was emitted by those translucent beetles. Even though I might possess some measure of a revolutionary soldier's bravery, the thought of those eerie beetles instilled panic within me. Creatures surpassing common understanding like this were too challenging to confront. The valley's gruesome scene had left too strong a shadow of fear in me. I motioned for everyone to silently retreat the way we'd come. But before we'd gotten far, Gawa's foot missed its mark, and he stumbled into a ditch. The ditch was concealed and parallel to our path, which is why we missed it on our way. Though it was little more than a meter deep, Gawa still grunted from the fall. I leaped down to help him and saw he was clutching his foot in pain. Luo Ning and the big guy joined us in the ditch, and with the aid of their flashlights, we saw Gawa had been impaled through his shoe by a sharp bone, leaving a gaping wound that bled profusely. The ditch was filled with layered bones of various animals, too numerous to count. It appeared to be a sacrificial burial pit for animals like cows, horses, goats, and dogs. In order not to disturb the beetles near the wooden tower, the big guy covered Gawa's mouth to mute his cries of pain. I pulled out the bone that had pierced his foot, and Luo Ning quickly applied some Yunnan Baiyao from her first aid kit to the wound before bandaging it to stop the bleeding. My hands were covered in Gawa's blood, which I wiped across my uniform without thinking. Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. The animal burial pit was inexplicably long, not square or round, but long, and it led directly to the wooden tower of corpses, a shape reminiscent of a Sura layout mentioned in The Secret Arts of Feng Shui. If my theory was correct, there should be another pit of the same scale somewhere parallel to us. Two parallel sacrificial pits flanking a tower-like tomb would form what is known in Feng Shui as a two dragons playing with a pearl formation. According to my theory, the adjacent pit should contain personal items belonging to the tomb's occupant. It was unclear if these pits were man-made or natural, though the latter seemed more likely. The sound of the river's current was loud, coming from the northwest, behind the so-called 9-story demon tower. A likely place for an underground river given that dragons are traditionally associated with water. If my assumptions held true, I already had a mental map of this underground world. What I needed now was to find the other sacrificial pit to confirm my guess. The big guy nudged my shoulder, snapping me out of my thoughts. What are you figuring out? I was so lost in contemplation that it took a moment to refocus. Turning to Luo Ning, I asked, can you estimate our current location? Roughly where would we be on the map? After consulting the compass against the map, Luo Ning pondered a while before responding. We've been moving northward nonstop for over 10 hours. Judging by our pace, we have gone past the great glacier overhead. We might be close to exiting the Kunlun Mountains. I shared my recent thoughts with the group. If we turned back, we'd only return to the fissure sealed by the avalanche. If my estimate was correct, following the underground river might lead us out. However, doing so would mean risking a journey beneath the 9-story demon tower. It was a desperate gamble for survival. After discussing among ourselves, we agreed that although the plan was fraught with danger, it warranted a risky attempt. However, I first wanted to look for another burial ditch nearby to confirm my theory. Before moving out, I inquired with Gawa what the 9-story demon tower actually was. Gawa, who spoke Mandarin with difficulty, explained after some effort that in his hometown, Shuawei, there's a relic identical to the 9-story demon tower. It's said that these towers were the funerary form for the ruling families of a bygone demonic kingdom. According to legend, when the demonic kingdom fell, their tombs were destroyed by the heroic King Geezer. The only remnants on the Tibetan plateau are decaying wooden frameworks and narrative poems passed down by herdsmen, endlessly praising King Geezer's unparalleled valor like the sun itself. When Tibetan herdsmen pass these relics, they bow and recite epics, not out of fear of the tombs of the demonic kings, but as a show of reverence for King Geezer. Gawa also mentioned some religious customs, but I couldn't understand well. Whether those fire-like beetles are related to the cemetery's resting spirits remains unknown. Leaving Luo Ning and the others behind, I crawled ahead to check for another ditch. As expected, about 100 meters away from the animal burial ditch, there was indeed another, filled with ancient boots, old Tibetan wooden slips, ancient Mongolian script on wood, painted wooden pieces, gold ornaments, wooden discs, wings, animal figures, bronze vessels, grain, and a copious amount of silk. various objects intended for burial. My guess turned out to be correct. The underground river behind the 9-story demon tower must connect to the outside world. So I sneaked back to the animal burial ditch to signal the others to move, leading the way with the big guy covering me with his gun. Followed by Gawa, whose foot was injured, with Luo Ning supporting him, we cautiously made our way underneath the imposing tower. The underground space was immense, but the tower and large mica panels nearly blocked the northern passage, leaving just a narrow path for us to traverse. Our hearts were in our throats as we passed beneath the tower. The sight of those flame-flickering beetles nearly sending our hearts leaping from our throats. Each meter of the 200-meter journey beneath the tower felt endlessly far. Finally managing to crawl past the 9-story demon tower, I went barely 200 steps before my foot sank into something soft and massive. Directing the flashlight downwards, I spotted a gigantic reptilian creature I had never seen before. With a long tongue extended, its skin color blended closely with the ground. It somewhat resembled a giant lizard in appearance, while also bearing similarities to a crocodile, but lacked the coarse exterior and the pointed muzzle typical of a lizard. Instead, its snout was rounder, and its tongue, red and long like a snake's, forked at the end. The creature's skin was dark, speckled with large, white round spots, making it look like an oversized frog with a long tail from a glance. Throughout my life, I feared nothing but found such critters particularly revolting. Startled, I instinctively ducked behind the big guy who also noticed the strange animal. Likely sharing my trepidation, he was startled but, true to his soldierly instincts, relied on his rifle and quickly fired a burst. The reptilian beast twitched a few times before lying still, lifeless. Luo Ning, who had been at the back, came over and after examining the dead animal, sighed in relief. It's a salamander that lives underground, feeding on insects and mayflies. It's harmless to humans, she informed us. While I didn't lament the death of an animal, I was more concerned with the big guy's reckless gunfire, worrying whether it might awaken the beetles in the tower. And as if to confirm my fears, the beetles, seemingly roused by the shots, blue globes of light, bright as lamps, flickered to life. The entire underground space was cast in a blue glow from the fires, the wooden tower itself catching flame, growing fiercer by the moment. Hundreds of blazing orbs hurtled towards us, engulfing us in flames that paradoxically emanated no heat but a chilling cold, making our teeth chatter. The big guy, sensing imminent danger, instinctively reached for the 2-hand grenades attached to his belt, ready to hurl them at the fireballs. I hastily grabbed his hand to stop him. Throw one. Save one is our glory bullet. I don't want to be burnt by those ghostly flames.